Welcome to the Christianity and Business Podcast, an initiative of the Archie W. Dunham College of Business at Houston Baptist University. I'm your host, Darren Shear, and this is a show that helps Christian business leaders to integrate biblical values into business. You can get more information about HBU's Center for Christianity and Business, including the Christian Business Review academic journal, articles, videos, and news about upcoming events by visiting our website at christianityandbusiness.com. And now, on to today's interview. Today, we're going to be discussing the topic of leading when you're not in charge, and we're joined by leadership and organizational consultant, Mike Bonem. Mike has served as an executive pastor, a senior manager with McKinsey & Company, which is, of course, one of the world's leading management consulting firms, and also in senior leadership roles in 2 environmental service companies. He's the author or co-author of 3 books, including In Pursuit of Great and Godly Leadership, Leading from the Second Chair, and Leading Congregational Change. And actually, his newest book that we're going to be kind of focusing on today is Thriving in the Second Chair. Welcome to the Christianity and Business Podcast, Mike.
Thanks a lot, Darren. It's great to be with you.
So your newest book, Thriving in the Second Chair, which comes out September the 22nd, right?
That's right.
So this is a book for leaders, but more so it's focused on the leader's relationship with his or her boss. And should also mention here that Mike really focuses, he certainly has an extensive business background, as I just talked about in the introduction, but he's taking he's really focusing on leadership in the church. But of course, these principles that are working for, some of the most incredible organizations are institutional churches. And there's so much that businesses and Christian business leaders can learn from that. And so we're going to be talking about some transferable principles today. But starting off, Mike, tell us, why did you write this book?
So as you mentioned, Darren, one of my earlier books is called Leading from the Second Chair. That book came out about 10 years ago, and it was also focused on folks who are in significant leadership roles, but not that first chair role, not the senior leadership role in churches and ministry settings primarily. And what happened in the time since that book came out is that I've had countless conversations, it seems like, with people in second chair roles, often in ministry settings, but sometimes in business settings as well, and realized there was just a lot that I have learned during that time and a lot that was not in that earlier book. And a couple of years ago, I started mulling that over and decided there was enough new material and enough new insights that I picked up that I wanted to put it together into this new book, Thriving in the Second Chair. And as you said, it's geared primarily for an audience in second chair roles in churches and in ministry settings. But the vast majority of the principles that we talk about are readily transferable to folks that are in other kinds of leadership settings, certainly in the for-profit and the business world as well.
Yeah. So more on a personal level, what was kind of motivating you, and what has made you so passionate about this topic? Because you've written about being in an executive pastor role, which for those who aren't aware, of course, you got your senior pastor, and then you have the executive pastor, which really is more of kind of the business manager for the church. What were some of those experiences, or maybe even one particular encounter that might come to mind that kind of motivated you to write this?
I would say 2 things. One is I served in that kind of role for 11 years and realized that there were very, very few resources available for people that specifically talked about the unique dynamics of being in that kind of second chair role. The other is that for the past past 8 years now, I've been doing coaching with groups of executive pastors. And so just hearing their stories and seeing some of the real joys they have, but also the struggles they have really motivated me to create another resource that would be helpful for folks in that kind of role. Again, realizing that there's just not that much out there that addresses those unique challenges.
Right. So for these leaders that are in the second chair, which, if I'm not mistaken, that's coming from kind of a orchestral, and bands have, first chair, second chair, third chair. Is that where the metaphor comes from?
We use that as that was, I think, part of in that earlier book, Leading from the Second Chair, part of what we had in mind in that language.
Got it. So is it written with a certain personality type in mind? Because you've got your kind of dominant drivers, and so if that's my personality, and I am in that executive role, or maybe I'm in middle management, or it's some level of the organization where I'm not kind of the top of the heap, so to speak. That's going to be more difficult, I think, than somebody that's just naturally kind of that. If we're looking at the DISC assessment, like somebody that's in that S category, that's just naturally going to be more supportive. Do you find that that this is more difficult for some than others?
What I find is that there's all different personality types in the second chair. It is more difficult for some than for others. But I'm reminded of something that Jim Collins said in Good to Great, where he talked about the less effective leaders first chair leaders, CEOs tended to use a model of a genius with 1,000 helpers. In other words, kind of one smart person running the organization. I just need my minions to go and do whatever I ask them to do. And he said that doesn't work very well in a corporate setting. It doesn't work very well in a church setting either. And so I come at this whole area of second chair leadership with a pretty strong disposition that second chair leaders need to have leadership gifts, and they need to use those gifts. Otherwise, they get frustrated, and their organizations, whether that's a church or a business, falls short of their potential.
Yeah.
And so somebody that's just the real kind of submissive, as you said, S type on the disc profile, might not be the best second chair leader. Now, somebody that's a strong D and has a lot of drive will have times when they're frustrated, when they want to go in one direction and the boss says no, we're not going to be able to do that. But I still think you need those strong leadership gifts and temperament to be able to do well in a second chair role.
So there are 10 principles that you talk about in the book. What would be the first one you would want to focus on? We're not going to have time to talk about all of them, but what's the first strategy? Let's say that I'm a kind of D dominant type personality, and I'm in that second chair role in my company, and I'm working for a boss who, has a similar temperament, but just a different style, different, maybe some different, trying to take things in a different direction. What would you say to that person, some of those principles?
So, you said at the start that the book focuses a lot on the relationship between that boss and subordinate, between first and second chair, and that certainly there's a lot more beyond that. But if you ask me the first thing I would talk about, it would have to be that. And the principle that I talk about is the idea of growing toward a partnership. One of the problems that I find that sometimes creeps up in those relationships is that a person is promoted into a second chair role, or is hired into that kind of role, and they're told, think kind of in classic business language, new COO comes in, or someone is promoted to become the chief operating officer, and the CEO says, look, I'm going to focus on our shareholders and the external environment, and setting some broad strategy, and I really need you to run the organization for us. And the COO takes that at face value, says, great, that's what I do well. I want to run the organization. And then all of a sudden they're frustrated because they're not really being treated as a partner. And what I found is that, and I think this is just as true in business as in ministry settings, it takes a long time to develop a trust-based partnership. And so the principle is to work to grow towards a partnership. Don't assume it at the very first. Don't throw up your hands in exasperation when on your second week on the job. You're not really living into what you consider to be a partnership. You don't have as much authority or responsibility as you would like to have.
Mm.
But to intentionally grow that relationship and grow that partnership to where it can be a really healthy trust-based partnership.
Yeah, excellent. Mike, the other day, it was about 2 days ago, I was taking my dog out for a walk and I couldn't help but notice that it looked like on the curb, the ground was moving. And I looked closer and it was a colony of leafcutter ants.
Hmm.
That were carrying leaves. I mean, these things can carry. I researched it afterwards. They can carry like 5,000 times their body weight.
Wow.
And they were carrying these leaves together. I mean, they were not deviating from their course whatsoever, but for about 25 yards from point A to point B to get those leaves back to where they needed to go, but these are not like mentally complex, I wouldn't think, creatures. I mean, they know what their role is, and they work together. There's nobody necessarily saying go here, go there, but it was just such a picture. It made such an impression on me. I asked my wife to come out and take a look. Like 4 hours later, they were still doing the same tasks. I mean, working together to get those leaves where they needed to go. And what are some other ways that maybe a second chair leader can kind of have that mindset that it's not about me, it's not about the CEO or the senior pastor, it's about the mission. What's another principle that can help us to get there?
Yeah, I think that another one of the practices principles that I talk about in the book is to think and act strategically. And the idea there is that the person in the second chair role has a significant influence on the organization. And again, this is whether you're COO of a large corporation, whether you're a number two or one of the number two people in the division of a company that's and so your scope of responsibility is much smaller. The principles are still the same, and that is that you take a big kind of high level vision and you have to unpack it and say, so how are we going to move from point A to point B? And so just like the ants that you were talking about, the second chair often is the one who has to figure out all the different steps that need to be put in place, all the different members of a team that need to be working together and what their different roles should be to make that happen. And so that idea of thinking strategically, really connecting with the vision and understanding what that means, and then being able to act. That doesn't mean the second chair does all of the acting, but to get the different parts moving in the right direction, I think is incredibly important.
Mm. There's another principle that you talked about, clarifying your role. And I know that this has been, something that has been a challenge for me in the past. I run my own company now, but at a previous or really every organization I've worked in previous to this had this experience of having a kind of a cloudy job title, so to speak. Well, not that the title wasn't cloudy, but the responsibilities that came along with that were not always incredibly clear.
Right.
And of course, I've got an entrepreneurial spirit, so I tend to go and find things to do that aren't even within that realm of responsibilities. So what would you say to somebody when it comes to this principle of clarifying your role?
Yeah, no, I appreciate you bringing that up, because that's one of the places where the analogy of the ants probably breaks down. Those ants know exactly what their role is.
Sure.
And there's not a lot of variation or deviation, as you said, in that. Folks in second chair roles, they might have a detailed job description. They might have they might or might not have that kind of clarity given to them. But these second chair roles tend to morph a lot over time. They tend to evolve. And um, and the last line in some job descriptions, I know this is very common in second chairs and ministry settings, is and all other duties as may be assigned.
Mm, right.
And what I've come to see is that a lot of the second chair roles, that's really functionally, that's the most important part of the job description.
Yeah,
It's
that's so
not
good.
all the different bullet points that got written down. It's the I'm available to do whatever is needed to help to move our organization forward. And so that in and of itself introduces an enormous amount of ambiguity or uncertainty in the role. And so the advice to folks that are living in that kind of ambiguity and the tension that may come along with it is first just realize that that's not abnormal, and you will probably never have um, absolute clarity, nailing down every detail about what your role is. Uh, but then the other advice is be willing to talk with your boss about it. If there are places where you're really not sure, do I have this authority or not? Talk to them about it. If there's some places where high level vision is not clear, talk to them about it so that you can be clear about what you're supposed to be doing. If there are places where you're feeling tension because you've been given where there are a lot of expectations, but you don't have the authority to match up to it, then have that kind of conversation. Uh,
Mm.
because because the very best second chair leaders that I know, their roles are constantly changing, and the only way you deal with that is to have a certain amount of flexibility in your own spirit and a lot of great communication with your boss.
Yeah. Do you think, and I found this to be somewhat effective in my personal experience, but you've worked with a lot more, many more organizations than I have. But when it comes to clarifying your role, is it helpful to go to your boss and find out what is it that we are measuring of that I'm responsible for, because then I can really focus on those couple of metrics. Or and if you're trying to measure too many things, I mean, I think it was Peter Drucker that said you measure what you treasure. So what's really important in my day-to-day responsibilities? Yeah, definitely if there's trash on the ground in the office building or in the parking lot, I need to pick that up. It's not in the job description, but once I get into the office, what is the main thing that I'm responsible for? Do you think it's helpful to kind of have that conversation?
Yeah, absolutely. Lack of clarity about organizational goals and personal goals is, I mean, it's a killer. It damages morale. It leads to a lot of wasted effort. It creates confusion within the organization. So you should absolutely have that conversation. And I would take it one step further and say that there will be some cases where the boss may not really have a good answer to the question. So
Mm-hmm.
if that's the case, propose a measurement. Propose, okay, so if you don't have a real good idea of what we ought to be measuring, then can I give you an idea of what I think would be most effective? Um, can we want to have a great workforce. So how are we going to decide whether we're doing that? Well, I don't know. Well, okay. So would employee turnover be a good measure? Would get creative about that and propose something if your boss doesn't have a ready answer for you.
Yeah, because I mean, they don't always come from. I mean, that was something that was very commonplace when I served in the Air Force. I mean, we tracked, we knew what our metrics were. There were metrics meetings and meetings about the metrics meetings, and so once a month, you knew that you were going to have to present the status of what was going on in your unit, and it wasn't going to be 50 different things. It was going to be one or two slides to show the overall health of what was happening. Because if that number starts to go down or that number starts to go up, you have a problem. And so, being able to, and I can see executive pastors really being able to help senior pastors in that way, where they often, I mean, I went to seminary, they don't teach tracking things
Oh no.
in seminary. And so being able to kind of bring in some of those best practices from business, I could see being very helpful.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So do you find that one of the other challenges that I had in working for a boss is differing work kind of leadership styles. How do you? And when I brought this up with a previous boss, the response was he basically was communicating to me that I don't have a style, that this is just what we need to do. You know what I mean? Like it which objectively was just not true.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
It was just his way of going about things. If you put 10 different leaders in that situation, they're going to do probably 10 different things,
Sure.
but they don't always see it that way. How do you help a first chair understand that, look, you have a style, I have a style, here's the difference between the two, and let's maybe do a SWOT analysis about that.
Yeah, a couple of things come to mind. I tell second chairs that I work with all the time, you have to be a student of your first chair. You need to learn kind of how they tick, what you need to learn their style, and so it is trivial, it is small of a level as possible. So, what is their preferred way of receiving information? Do they prefer for you to just whenever you have something to pop in? Do they prefer you to email? Do they prefer you to meet with them just in a real structured way once a week and have a list of what you're going to talk to them about? Do they want to see that list in advance? Those are all little nuances, and every first year is going to have different ways of responding to that. Are they real relational, or are they more task oriented? If they're relational, then plan on spending the first 5 or 10 minutes of a meeting catching up on how's your family, or what'd you do this weekend, or things like that. If they're task oriented, they don't want any of that small talk. And so second chairs need to pay attention to that with their first chair leaders. And then the companion, the second piece of advice that I give with that is recognize that the relationship will be asymmetrical. And what I mean by that is it's really nice when your boss is just as much of a student of you as you are of them, when they can learn your style just as much as you're learning theirs, and they will flex and adapt some to who you are. But you can't require that of them. You can't tell them, well, you need to learn my style because I'm learning yours, because they're the boss.
Yeah.
And so if we can kind of get out of the mindset of thinking that this relationship has to be symmetrical, and I can accept that it's going to be somewhat asymmetrical, I'm going to be a lot better off in dealing with some of those differences. And then the third thing that I would say is if there's something in particular that is really causing you in that second chair role to have difficulties relating to your boss, talk to him about it. So if if you feel like your boss just doesn't care about you at all as a person because they're so task oriented and so driven, and it's gone beyond just I have a personal preference, but it's really affecting my ability to work, then talk to him about that. So, I feel like I'm almost invisible to you as a person. I'm just a cog in a machine. Now, there's probably a more tactful way to say that than what I just did, but if it's a big issue to you where it's affecting your ability to relate and to work, then you need to bring that up.
Excellent. What would be one of your most important pieces of advice to the first chairs that are listening when it comes to navigating this working relationship with their second chair?
Yeah, I think that making, and I want to focus this really specifically on their relationship with one second chair, or maybe they've got a couple of people. So you can have, I see this with, say, a pastor who might have 2 or 3 direct reports, but then has 20 other people on staff in the church. And they think, well, I need to spend time with everybody. Well, yeah, you do, but you really need to spend time with those direct reports. Or if you just have one executive pastor, you really need to spend the time with them. And so one of the biggest pieces of advice I offer to first chairs is invest in that relationship with the second chair, because the more that they understand who you are as a first chair, the more they understand how you tick, the more clearly they understand where we're trying to go as an organization, the better they're going to be able to function in their second chair role. And vice versa. The less they understand that, the harder it is going to be for them to be that partner who makes things happen for you.
Excellent. Great advice. So as a parting piece of advice to the kind of circling back to the second chairs, what would you say to encourage them?
Gosh, there's so much. One of the later chapters in the book talks about how lonely the second chair role can be.
Yeah.
And some of that may be unique to the kind of executive pastor role in a church. And yet I don't think that it's completely, I think there are parallels in business settings as well. We can get in almost any kind of work environment. We can get into this place where we feel really isolated, where we know that it's not appropriate to say particularly if we're having some frustrations with the boss. It's not appropriate to talk with our peers, our colleagues about it. I mean, that starts to move into insubordination and kind of subversive action. That's really not a good thing to do. If the boss has a boss, it should be a last resort to go around the boss to talk to somebody else or to talk to the board, a board member about, the problems that we're having. So who do we talk to? And, the truth is a lot of times people don't talk to anybody. And they sit and they stew on it, and they become more resentful or more frustrated. And so that whole chapter of overcoming loneliness is about finding other people, often outside of the organization, but people who might have kind of similar work responsibilities and certainly similar worldviews, Christian worldview, who you can have some companionship with, and who will get to know you well enough that they may look at you once and say, you know what, you're not giving your boss, the credit that he or she is due. Maybe the part of the problem is you. And at other times we'll listen to you and say, well, here's a different strategy you might try to work this problem.
Yeah. Fantastic advice. And I think that's a good segue into telling us where people can learn more about you, because you offer that sort of support, but specifically for executive pastors. Do you also work with business leaders?
I do. I have it's a relatively small portion of what I do, but I do coaching work with folks in all kinds of different leadership roles, so ministry and business leaders. And the best way to find that is, the book's going to be on Amazon, and the best way to find me is just through my website, which is Mike Bonem, BONEM.com.
Well, it's going to be a tremendous encouragement to everyone who reads it, and because it's so many of us, even if you are you are the CEO, you are the owner of the company. A lot of times you've got shareholders, you've got boards, you've got people that you answer to, and so this is going to be a great encouragement to you. And the book will be out September the 22nd on Amazon, right? And certainly go to mikebonem.com, get on that email a list. That way you can hear about what's happening. But ultimately, if we're in that second chair situation, we have a first chair that we're working for. Ultimately, like Colossians 3:23 says, we're working for the Lord. It's the Lord Christ whom we serve, and that really will make us the best second chair that we could possibly be, when we have that understanding that, look, I'm not just working for this senior pastor or this CEO. I'm working for the Lord ultimately. Absolutely. So, Mike, thank you for sharing your time and valuable expertise, and may God continue to bless your consulting company and this book and everything you're doing to help executive pastors, to help leaders to serve the Lord in their organizations.
Yeah, thanks so much, Darren. I appreciate that, and appreciate the opportunity to be on this podcast with you.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode, and if so, we would greatly appreciate it if you'd leave us a quick rating and review for the Christianity in Business podcast on iTunes. You can get more information about HBU's Center for Christianity and Business at christianityandbusiness.com. Thanks for listening, and keep integrating biblical values into your business.